welcome. Thank you for joining us for another session of Caring for Others, Caring for Ourselves. We have a wonderful panel with us today. Today's topic is exploring the spirit in respite. So often in our culture, I think we focus so much on the mental and physical aspects of our health. But one of the greatest areas of neglect, I think anyway, is our spiritual dimension, the spiritual character of each one of us that carries us through so much, through our delights, but also our challenges. So today, speaking of delight, it's my pleasure to meet with three wonderful guests to really explore this hidden dementia, there's a Freudian, that hidden dimension. This show's panel will share their expertise in pastoral care, yoga, Reiki, and other healing practices as they work to support caregivers and their loved ones. So to start, I'm Emily Kearns, hosting the program. This is a program produced by Stacy Hammerlin, who's behind the camera, with the Massachusetts Lifespan Respite Coalition. So today we have, from the far left, we have Marjie Sokoll, we have in the middle, Joan Ruffels, and we have Annette Nicolas. So we'll begin the program asking each of you to introduce yourselves and speak a little bit about your background, just your affiliation to start with. Marjie, why don't we start with you?
So I'm Marjie, and I'm a social worker, and I'm the Director of Spirituality and Aging at Jewish Family and Children's Service, and I'm also the Director of the Betty Ann Greenbaum Miller Center for Jewish Healing. So what all of that means is that I mostly work with older adults who are dealing with illness, loss, caregiving, stress, those kinds of things. People with Parkinson's, people dealing with dementia, all kinds of chronic situations, chronic illnesses that develop as we get older. So that's really the focus of my work, and I started the program over 20 years ago, and so part of what I also do is project management as well as fundraising for the program.
Great.
Thank you.
Important areas to have spiritual dimensions added to.
Yeah.
Thank you. Joan, welcome.
Thank you, Emily. Thanks for having me on today. I'm excited to be here with Marjie and Annette and the viewers at home. My name's Joan Ruffels, and I'm an integrative healing professional. I'm a student of yoga, currently completing my yoga teacher training, something I started 22 years ago and put aside as I shifted my focus to raising my family. I'm excited to be closing the loop with that. I facilitate international wellness retreats. The next one will be in February in St. Lucia, West Indies. And this past spring, I coordinated memory-making cafes in the Merrimack Valley.
Great, thank you, welcome. Annette,
Thank you.
could you please tell us a little bit about who you are and your affiliations?
Right.
Yeah.
My name's Annette Nicolas, and I'm an interfaith chaplain. And I visit 10 memory care communities, mostly on the North Shore, a little bit into the Merrimack Valley. And I've been working in memory care for 7 years, and bringing spiritual support specifically for about 5 years now. Primarily, I come in with a program called Cheerful Spirit. It integrates our senses and our faith and is a welcoming gathering for folks to just be able to identify God in their lives. We bring a lot of song into it. And I also officiate church services in memory care communities. I do private visits, and I host creative writing workshops in memory care communities as well.
Great, thank you. So we have an exciting panel here, and why don't we dig a little deeper, and why don't we start with you, Annette? And if you could paint a picture for us about, one of your sessions, what would it look like if we were to walk into it, but also speak a little bit about how you came to this work.
Okay, well, I'll start with the journey, I think. I'm an artist by training, and I had always been involved in prayer groups and interfaith work, and I was a hospice volunteer. And about 10 years ago, I began to feel a pull toward ministry in a more formal way, and decided to go back for my master's. And to offset the cost of that, I wanted to get back into the workforce. I had been at home with my children. And the quickest way back was to become a certified nurse assistant. I thought that's a good caregiver, that's what I've been doing. And so I did, and I was hired. And the folks that hired me saw my creative tendencies. And I was transferred into the memory care community as a program assistant. And that's where a lot of different strings and threads of my life began to weave together. And that's where the Cheerful Spirit program emerged as a response to the needs of the residents in the community. So the Cheerful Spirit program, to see it, we meet in a circle or perhaps a half circle, semicircle, in the memory care community itself. There will be between 6 and 20 people depending on the community. I have my music stand and a book and a ukulele. I taught myself to play the ukulele to do this, so that's always evolving too. And the program is about an hour. It has a theme for the day, and it's usually seasonal or tied to the holidays for whatever faith tradition might be having celebrating a high holiday. And this helps to orient us not only to the time of year, but also to our faith and our connection to spiritual kin. So it's meant to be a place where people can connect to spiritual kin, tapping into our own experiences of faith, and then identifying God working in our lives, in our everyday lives. So the program has that theme. It revolves around prayer and scripture, music. Sometimes there's poetry. Sometimes I bring visuals. Sometimes
and this is a Christian scripture?
No, this, it's from the Hebrew and Christian Bible. So
okay.
I go back and forth because that's who my audience has been so far. I would be happy to bring in other sacred texts. These are the texts that are relevant to my groups. And that's the joy of the Cheerful Spirit program, is that it really is tailored to the needs of and the dynamics of the group. So folks with that need memory support, that have cognitive limitations, it's really easily adaptable and their life experiences. So that's the joy of it. And it's also the joy of it for me because this is constantly evolving and constantly recreating itself. And you'll see the people in the group, sometimes we're laughing, sometimes we're weeping, we're talking, we're praying, we're chewing on topics, asking questions, just having some beautiful silence where we really can feel the sacred working among us, in sometimes surprising. We weren't, when times when we aren't expecting it, and it also I bring in questions to talk about our faith lives as adults as we're aging, and how our faith, how we sustain our faith as we get older, what it means to be a faithful person as an older adult.
Great. Great. Well, thank you. One of the things that I think we'll start to explore and start to see are some of the similarities and differences in the work that you're all doing in terms of the ritual spaces created and things like that. So we'll circle back. Joan, would you like to speak a little bit about what it would look like to see you practicing, and then also a little bit about what brought you to the work?
Sure. So the work I envision myself doing is a form of yoga with caregivers and loved ones, providing both with an opportunity for connection with others through ritual, meaningful conversation, doing some postures, and providing the opportunity to journey inward to find the sparkle within, to the place of love and kindness, truth and peace that dwells within all of us. The work I do will be directly with families and small groups that meet regularly. The idea is to make this as easy and inviting for families as possible, to create a regenerative time in sacred space, and to provide and practice simple tools and techniques to draw upon in staying connected with our spiritual nature in day-to-day living. Since my vision's at its inception, I'm approaching this with some curiosity as to what wants to unfold. I do want the work to help in mitigating feelings of loneliness, and isolation that many caregivers and loved ones experience. I also want the work to address general anxiety I see a lot of people experiencing, which manifests as sometimes just frenetic body energy. So we can work with some postures to help release that energy, and my hope is that the space that's now emptied can be filled with the space of the divine to come in and provide peace and accessible peace and stillness for people, and that our time together continues to grow and expand beyond the group. The other thing I'd really like our group to experience is being seen and heard from the space of our divine self. I don't think that occurs enough. And so that's my vision.
Great, thank you. It's a wonderful vision.
Thank
and
you.
I know just from my experience of your work, your vision is already actually unfolding. I've seen it in the Memory Cafe space. Do you want to speak a little bit about, to paint a picture about Memory Cafe space, like the work that you did last week, for example, just so that the audience can have a tangible sense of what this looks like? Because I think it's a lovely guiding vision, but you're already starting to implement it. Yeah.
So one thing that I loved about memory cafes in the Merrimack Valley was the name, Memory Making Cafes. So we wanted the memory cafes to be present oriented. We wanted them to be in the moment. So last week we had a cafe in which the focus was stress management. And the idea was to provide people with some tools to walk away with, things that they could use in day-to-day life. So we focused on some simple breathing techniques that everyone can use anytime, anywhere, when they're feeling stressed or overwhelmed. And gentle postures, and the connection that I'm really hoping, the ritual part of connecting with others. And then a gentle guided meditation, which was a new experience for several people in the group. They were open to it, to receiving it. And the idea behind that is just to begin to build a practice, to just start to lower that stress level to a neutral point. So that's why I'd like our groups to meet regularly, just to kind of keep bringing that high stress level down and to balance.
Great,
So,
great.
Yeah.
Could you say a little bit more about what brought you to the work as well? You talked about your vision. You've given us a great example of where you're starting to really guide folks, because of that vision. So what moved you in this direction of identifying the spiritual need, to support caregivers, and how you made the transition yourself?
So at one point, not too long ago, it seemed like everyone I was meeting was in a caregiver role. And it's funny how you draw these experiences to yourself, but I kept meeting with people who were very stressed, maybe new caregivers, or trying to navigate how to do this on top of an already full life. And as one person was sharing their story with me and about her caregiving experience and trying to coordinate her family around caregiving and coordinate outside services, an image came to me of a person just underwater, kind of treading water, and with a head bobbing up every now and then, catching a breath of air as they could, and kind of going under again. And my sense was that there was no groundedness or anchor to anything other than the next task that needs to be done. And I was wondering where the spiritual connection was in not only that person's life, but in caregivers' lives in general. Where do you draw strength from? Where's the foundation of calm and peace and love and all these things? So that's kind of what led me there. I'm also a caregiver right now for a family member, and it's a challenge for both parties. It's not just the caregivers. So, it's important for me to incorporate the loved ones into the fold here because it's a partnership. So that's kind of how I'm getting into it. Yeah.
Well, thank you. I mean, one of the things we'll talk about in a minute is not only the impact that our work has for the caregivers and their families and all, but also on ourselves. So you're starting to touch upon that too, which is great. We'll revisit that in a sec. So Margie, how about you? Can you paint a picture of some of the program sites that you facilitate and heal in and generate spiritual support in, and also speak a little bit of how you came to the work?
So maybe I'll start with that. First of all, I just want to say how wonderful it is to be with the two of you and with you, Emily, to be with such kindred spirits who care about this topic, because I've cared about the topic of older people my whole life, even when I was younger. And I've thought about it a lot because it's not true about our society in general. I mean, most of our society focuses on youth, and there's a lot of ageism, and there's a lot of stigma associated with a lot of things associated with aging. And for me, I've always had a very positive and it's been a love. And I realized looking back on my life, it's because I had 4 grandparents, and I was very fortunate. I had to have 4 grandparents that I felt very connected to. And then I had all these other relatives, and so I grew up surrounded by all these older people. And like Annette, I also love music, and I played the guitar, and as a young person I would bring my guitar and I would play in nursing homes and those kinds of things. And so it was something I did as a teenager, and I saw the joy it brought to people at that age. And I'm doing that now as a 62-year-old woman, and I think to myself, wow, how lucky am I that I got to put this on my resume. I play guitar and sing, and I get to do that, and
Lovely.
I get paid for it. And as Annette was saying, it brings such joy to people because it's a sense of connection, it's things that are familiar, songs that are still in that part of the brain, the memories of those songs and the feelings it evokes. So some of my work I am playing the guitar and singing. Other times I am overseeing other people who are doing that. We also go into nursing homes and assisted living facilities and bring the spirit of Shabbat, the Sabbath, and it's not just for Jewish people, it's for Christian people as well, and we have Muslims who come. Because what I've found is that as we get older, we're looking for meaning and purpose in our lives, and that's really what religion or spirituality gives us. I mean, for some people they find a spiritual self in religion, and for others, religion isn't something they feel so great about, or they've had some negative experiences, or it's just not something they relate to, but they can relate to spirituality. And what's spirituality? It's just connecting to something greater than yourself. So as I said, it could be religion, but it could also be nature, and it can be music, and it can be relationships. So that's how I see the work that I do. And I work a lot with people with Parkinson's and their caregivers, and we do Parkinson's dance. So we're dancing and listening to music, and we're connecting to something greater than ourselves, which is each other, and not feeling isolated. We also have a memory cafe that you were talking about, and that's also very joyous, filled with art-related guests who bring music and theater. I also lead a healing circle for the staff where I work, and I bring my Tibetan bell, and we sit there and we breathe and we meditate, and I've been doing that for about 16 years. So when we think about caregiving, it's all ages, and it's people in the workforce. As you were mentioning, Joan, that you're a caregiver. So many people are caregivers, and so it's a place for the staff to come once a month and be together, and I lead a meditation, and we do prayers for healing. And so that's also, I could be having my guitar, or I could be walking around with a Tibetan bell, or I could be thinking about raising money for the programs, because these are not programs that get reimbursed. So luckily there are people out there that care about them. But just to go back, I think that's really, I feel so fortunate that I had such positive experiences with my own grandparents. And now that we're living longer with longevity, I think that's the thing that's really shifted in my lifetime, is that we're living longer, and this has started with the baby boomers, but it's going to continue with the millennials and Generation X. And so if we're living longer, what does that say about meaning and purpose in life? And so that's really where my focus is now.
Well, thank you. Yeah. I mean, I think one of the things that we're touching upon is that it's so interesting. You're all creating ritual spaces, sacred spaces, but then I'm also hearing that you're working with folks, developing skills that they take away from that and integrate into the everyday space, so that the spiritual dimension that you're speaking about doesn't stay, right, just in that sacred space, but in the staff, in the workplace. Going to Joan, your breath and the idea of the scripture inspiring us, but we carry that with us. So I think that's one of my takeaways, which is really, thank you for that, really powerful. Let me ask you, jumping around a little bit from the guided questions, but how have you been changed? And actually I'll start with Marjie. So, this is a spiritual journey that we're all on in the sacred space and also in our day-to-day. But you spoke a little bit about, as a teen, seeing the joy, and I could hear and also see in your expression that you were touched by that, and that kind of inscribed or etched in you something important. Your current work, how does that touch you? How does that impact you as well as part of this circle that you create?
So how does my current work impact me? I thought about this because we got the question, you asked that question ahead of time, and I thought about it, and I really think that part of my work is also dealing with grief and loss, which is also something else we don't talk about in our culture. So forget, illness and all of those things, but loss. And so one of the first things I wanted to do when I started working was to start a bereavement group. And we have a bereavement group, an ongoing bereavement group that's been for the last 16 years, so that anybody at any point who's looking for a group can have a place to come and feel not alone, because so much about this is not being alone and isolated. And I think that when I think back on my life, I had some early losses as a 2-year-old and a 6-year-old that I would never have known impacted me in the way that it was to go forward in my life and my work if my mother hadn't written about it in my baby book. And I just realized this in the last 10 years, that when I was 2 years old, my great-grandfather died. And he just disappeared. Where is he? I don't know. I don't even know how to speak at that point. But at 4 years old, I said to my mother, because she wrote it in the baby book, I said, "Where's great-grandpa? Is he in heaven with God?" So clearly I'd been thinking for 2 years, where is great-grandpa? And can you imagine, for 2 years, so when we think of young children and how impacted they are. So now fast forward, now I'm 6 years old and my grandfather died. And I remember that very well, and I was very close to him. And by that point I understood really what death was. And I said to my mother, I wish I could visit with Grandpa one more time. So here we have a 2-year-old who loses her great-grandfather. I'm thinking about death. No one's talking about it. And now I'm 6 and I get it, and I'm devastated. And so that stayed with me a long time, and that sense of sort of the existential death anxiety that so many of us live with, knowing that we are mortal and how do we cope with that? And as people are older, it's even more relevant. I mean, not that we can't die at any age, of course, but as you're older, it feels closer. And so those questions of what does it all mean, what has my life meant, feels very much more pressing. And I think that's what I feel I can give at this stage of my career, because I've worked through some of those issues of my own early traumas of loss, to be able to be present with others at this point, where they are now. Because I'm older and I've been able to deal with those things, I would say. So that's
Thank you.
a big change in my professional life.
And I think, what we're finding is that caregivers, and you said even staff are caregivers, I mean, we care very much about each other in different roles, whether it's our immediate family or not, but it's a constant journey where loss is our very familiar companion.
That's right.
Whether you are journeying with someone or accompanying someone who's aging more typically, or a younger person living with challenges, physical or cognitive or intellectual disabilities, because the loss, what I've heard in certain families, is the loss of the expected and the mainstream narrative of what a healthy child is, right, is a constant loss. And you're always up against loss, when you try to go shopping or the restaurant, right? When someone is marginalized, they don't fit in to the mainstream idea of who we're supposed to be in terms of mental and physical ability and health, right? Everyone's under 20 and running marathons, right?
Exactly.
So I think when we journey with the caregivers, because of your personal experience, you have on a cellular level, what I'm hearing anyway, is this real intimate journey since you were a wee one, right, with grief and loss, and you carry that to your work with caregivers, including staff. It's really, really lovely and powerful, a powerful gift, I'd say.
Absolutely, and I would just say that it's also just, as you said, just being with a person, accompanying them, sitting with them, and not thinking that I have to change it or fix it in any way. Yeah.
Right, right. I know the fix-it mode is a dominant mode in our culture as well, right? There must be a manual on that one. No. Joan, how about you? How, if and how have you been impacted with your work? Even with beginning with creating the vision, how does the vision guide you or transform you? The Memory Cafe experience, your yoga?
Yeah. Well, since my vision is in its inception, it's too soon to know how I've been changed by that work. However, drawing from past experiences, when I'm with others in sacred space, where I'm aligned with my spiritual nature and the presence of the divine, a stillness and a peace, and a feeling of oneness with all that is felt and experienced. And it's my hope through this work that others can experience and feel that as well. And that's that calm for a caregiver, for example. Just being in a space with the divine, I think lowers the stress level beyond the time we share together. So that's part of my hope in the work that I'm doing. As far as, it's funny, the conversation that we just had about caregiving and loss, because one of my questions is, with caregiving, what happens when you're no longer a caregiver? And planting seeds. Like, what's your role when caregiving, what's life beyond caregiving? And can we begin to plant seeds during the caregiving process for what's next, so that people can look forward to a new chapter and begin to cultivate a vision for life beyond caregiving and something to look forward to. And I'm wondering, is there, again, like a ritual or a rite of passage or something kind of, formal that we can start to develop and support to mark this passage?
Wouldn't that be great? Because I, when I was coordinator of a day program and people passed, sometimes expected, sometimes not, suddenly the caregiver sense of self-identity and primary relationship is gone in a flash. And even though they've been mourning, or they've told me they've been mourning the loss of their loved one, as they feel like dementia has stolen them away, even though I feel like the work that you do counters that narrative a little bit, or creates another space for a presence, so it's not total loss. But anyway, then they awaken the next day and they don't have a place. But I think the spiritual dimension kind of gives a space to look at that, and it would be interesting to ritualize it, to actually create a rite of passage. We don't have one, do we?
No, right.
Yeah.
And just like Margie was saying, I mean, people are living longer, and this is not an issue that's going away. This is going to be a new normal for us, something we really haven't experienced before.
Well, we need to do a workshop on that. And put that in your visioning.
And we need to create new rituals and our own rituals, that don't exist.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Because that's one of the things I hear with my older friends is the loneliness, because most of their loved ones have passed. They're outliving their loved ones. And, there's no rite of passage for those, repetitive losses, and then to be on the other side of it. So that's really provocative and important. Yeah. Well, we'll handle that in our next show, called the Rites of Passage show. Thank you for that. That's really interesting. Yeah. Annette, how about you? How have you been impacted, or have you, by your work? What does that look like?
Yeah, I have very much been impacted by it. And the first thing I thought of was that my understanding of the viability of the spirit really deepened in my work. And I'm going to piggyback off of something you said, Marjorie, in that in your experience as a child, that for 2 years when you didn't have words for it, you were thinking about your great-grandfather. And that speaks on the other end of the age spectrum to me, because the folks I work with often have lost their words. And I had an abbreviated version. I had this at the very beginning of my ministry. A gentleman came into the room where I was getting ready for the day, and he often did, and he would just sort of walk around and we'd make small talk. But he became more intense and not quite agitated, but just something was really important. So I stopped what I was doing and really was listening to him. Really hard for him to talk. And what he began to tell me was the story of the separation between him and his father. And I said, gee, I hope you feel loved and supported, that the decision you made was hard, but it was okay for you, because I knew his family really loved him, and that maybe that love had been replaced. And he said, yes, but it still hurts. And I thought, here this guy was for years without somebody to talk to about it. And he worked hard to find the words for it. And I've had that happen repeatedly, that in my work I see the spirit coming out often in one-to-one interactions, sometimes in a question that comes up in the group. And so I believe that our spirits it's that divine spark. It's incorruptible. It's there, and it's still yearning to be expressed. And it needs an avenue to do that. And the losses, as you said, as we get older, the losses just keep piling up. And dementia doesn't stop the spirit from feeling those losses.
So I know this wasn't in one of the preparation questions, but I thought we could, wrap up today's session with a brainstorming session between all of us. If you were to make 1 or 2 recommendations to respite providers, to folks starting a day program or memory cafe, based on what you've experienced and what we've been talking about, what would be the 2 recommendations that you would give them in terms of supporting the spiritual? So I can mull over that for a few seconds. But Margie, we'll start with you. Or we don't have to go in any order.
So how to bring the spiritual into a new program is
correct.
Yeah. So I think that these words can be problematic. That's even saying, it's better than it was maybe 20 years ago, but when I use that's why I like the title of Director of Spirituality and Aging, because then what does that mean exactly? And people can get really turned off by it. And I think I'm a social worker, so I think it's all about meeting a person where they are. It's not what I think or what I would want. And so creating a space that's safe, that people can feel like they can be themselves, that they can bring themselves, that they can show up, and that they're not going to be judged in any ways or criticized, because we don't have many spaces like that out there in the world. And not to even mention our own self-criticism. So forget it. So out in the world, so a place where they can feel like they actually want to come and show up, and they can feel like they belong. And that's why I bring the Tibetan bell. And sometimes I call it a singing bowl, whatever, it's just a generic bell. And people miss it when I'm not there, if I'm away. Particularly, I'm thinking of the Parkinson's dance program. It's sitting in my office, and if I'm away on vacation, someone else will go in and get the bell. So it's something just that's non-threatening, but that brings people together in community.
So I'm hearing a sacred space, a safe space, a sense of community and belonging, you said, and then a ritual object that calls folks to be together and to be present. So in this case, a bell. right? And it has an auditory aspect to it, at least in this case. So those are really interesting elements. We're going to kind of put together this, recipe that people can borrow, especially, the coalition is funding, we have a new round of mini grants. And I would love to see, in some of these innovative programs, some of these takeaways incorporated. So we have a safe space with creating a sense of belonging. We have a ritual element that calls people together in a place where folks can belong. Joan, how about you? Do you have some thoughts? Yeah.
I do. For a time, I wrote, created, and performed wedding ceremonies, and every single couple who came to me wanted something similar. They wanted a spiritual dimension to their wedding ceremony, not religious, but some kind of a spiritual component. They wanted ritual, the ritual elements that go into the marriage ceremony. They wanted to be seen in community as they came together, and they wanted celebration, fun, and joy with community. So that would be another ingredient, maybe.
So fun and joy.
Yeah.
But also what I'm hearing, and we've also heard it earlier, to be seen in community is interesting. Not only to feel it, but also to be seen. I think maybe all of you spoke about that, so that's interesting. All right. The stew is getting thicker. Lovely. Great. Annette, what are you thinking?
I think especially, I'm going to say, it matters to all of us. In the realm of dementia, I think it matters more because what I'm going to say is thinking about the viability, again, the viability of the spirit, that spirit, that divine spark, that's still good and alert and attentive and wanting to express, because the dementia story is about loss. People are always described by what they can't do anymore. And I have found that in dealing with putting aside those things and looking at that divine part of us, enables people to be more than what their losses are. And so it's I think programming that and ritual that brings that out and identifies that right away is on a good course. And also think outside the box, the embodied experience of ritual, of being together. It's not all words. It's all of our senses were created as beings with a lot of ways of understanding each other and connecting to each other. It's not all just verbal communication, and to really tap into that.
I think that's really important. Yeah. I don't know if you know the anthropologist Victor Turner. Anyway, he talks about multidimensionality of ritual, and you've all touched upon it. And you especially now are saying so. And I found that true with my journey with my parents with dementia, that they were so present in terms of many senses, in the movement and the sound, and of course they're finding music. We know this, but now the science is behind it. Smell. So incense, all of the different senses, that's a really good point. Yeah. So is there anything, I know we're going to wrap up in a moment, is there anything that you'd like to add? I know, Annette, you brought an image.
It's a holiday card. It's a painting of little kids going down on a toboggan. And the community that I was working in, I think every year runs a holiday card contest. And so we, in our community, in the memory care community, had a resident who was an artist. And I had been working with my group for a couple of years. So I sent the picture in because it represented a team effort. Everybody belonged, everybody contributed to that image, in opinions or in actually painting it or deciding what elements were going to be in there. And we won, and we got a cash prize for that. And then we used that cash prize to install an American flag in the courtyard. That was the residents' idea. And we had a really meaningful ceremony and flag raising on Memorial Day where veterans shared their stories. And it was just really beautiful. And so it spoke a little bit to legacy. We could have used that money for a pizza party or an ice cream social. But they wanted to do something different. And so to me, that represents other ways to tap into those spiritual needs of belonging, of meaningfulness, of legacy, and teamwork, being a part of something big and contributing. And it was a really great experience.
I think that's great, especially as we expand the notion of spirituality. So we have these deliberately created sacred spaces, but then we also have sports that create a ritualized, you know, sacred space where we can feel belonging. We have flag ceremonies. There are so many spaces that are ritualized that allow our emotions and sense of belonging to come out, all the elements that you've already touched on. So I'm really happy that you've expanded, starting with the card created by the team to then the flag ceremony. And all of that being spiritual practice and expression is really lovely.
Yeah.
Do either of you have something that you want to add to the end of the conversation?
I had sent in an image of the healing circle of the staff.
Speak about that. Yeah.
And I do want to say, I want to make sure that since we're focusing on caregiving, we have a free hotline at Jewish Family and Children's Service that's open to the whole community. And the phone number, 1-800-980-1982. It's free and it's open to the whole community. So it's 9 to 5, Monday through Friday. So it's very important we take this seriously about being a resource for people in the caregiving role, which is most of us. So that goes back to the healing circle that I've been doing now for the past 16 years. And it changes over time, and the staff changes over time. So I've seen so many different experiences, but recently, and people come from all different backgrounds. It's a healing circle that is not religiously based. And only recently, because I was doing an event, did I find out that one of my colleagues had been coming to the circle for months, and what it had meant to her because her dad had been diagnosed with a terminal illness. Now, I would never have known that if I wasn't doing an event and started talking to her about it because she was involved in the event as our events manager. And she shared with me how much the healing circle meant to her. And I asked her if she would publicly speak about it at the event. And she was brave enough to do that. And to see a younger person talk about what it meant to be in the workplace and have a place where she can go once a month to really be there. We also offer prayers for healing at the end. The thing is, though, I would never have known that if I hadn't been doing this event and had talked to her about it and then asked her to speak. So I think sometimes we don't know. I think more often than not, we have no idea what our impact is. And I think for me personally, I just want to do the best I can in the work. And it's nice when you get feedback in that way, but often it's like throwing a stone into the lake and the ripples go out and you have no idea where they went.
That's true. Thank you. And thank you for talking about the workplace. In a survey we did, the coalition did, we found that the majority of the respondents said that they didn't feel it was safe in the workplace to talk about their caregiving burden. But if they had a confidential space and someone besides their supervisor, they would be able to share it. So your image of the circle, I think, provides that safe space away from their supervisor. In a confidential space, it sounds like, where the working caregivers can share their responsibilities and burden. Yeah, thank you. Joan, do you want to wrap up by sharing?
The word you just used, a word you just used was burden. And I have a quote from Paulo Coelho, who wrote in the book The Pilgrimage. And this is speaking to looking at what comes our way and with different eyes. So he writes, when you travel, you experience an act of rebirth. Since all things are new, you see only beauty in them, and you feel happy to be alive. When we travel, we walk toward adapting to new situations and receiving in return all of the thousands of blessings that life generously offers to those who seek them. So I know people are burdened sometimes, often, by their caregiving responsibilities, but if we can flip a switch, if we can provide an opportunity for people to see with those new eyes as if they've just returned from a fabulous vacation, and can bring that, just incorporate that into their day-to-day life, a magical moment would be being receptive to the thousands of blessings that life generously has to offer us in every moment. So
Great, thank you. Thank you all for sharing your work and your vision with us, and so delighted to have had this sacred space, an opening to make place for the spiritual dimension and respite. And thank the audience also for participating today.
Thank you. Thanks, Emily.